So let's go ahead and jump back in and now discuss what is actually happening when we press these buttons. What are the callbacks doing? Because this is where the complexity comes in and where I want our users to understand how we're interacting with the broker depending on these selections and what we're doing. So, first we did add a selection to each of these tables. So there is a new item that I do want you to pay attention to, where we're able to make the rows selectable. So there is a row selectable property from the dash core component for this data table, which will allow you to choose whether you want that to be single or multi. Of course, we're only doing stuff in the single format, so we're going to make our row selectable equal to single, which will allow each of these tables to be able to change which of the securities we want to select and click on here. And then we'll show you what that looks like in our live view here for being able to go back and forth with that brokerage link. All right, so with that, let's start with our first callback here down at the bottom that is defined for updating our trading options. And this is going to update our limit price, stop price, and our trade toast. So one of our 4 toasts, and this is going to update our trade toast. So anytime we change the type drop down, so type is referring to this drop down here, that is the name of this property, the ID of that property, and anytime we select submit order, this green button, it will activate this specific callback. So again, if you want to understand more about these callbacks, please go back to that manual and automatic callback section where we discuss these in detail and why it's important to have these outputs, inputs, and states right, why it's important to have these in the right order and understand what you're grabbing. But in here, if one of these two fire this, we're going to come down here and do one of a few things. We're again going to figure out which property fired it. If the property that fired it is type, so if the type drop down changed, if the type is market, so if when I change this, if I want it to be limit, market, or bracket, then I want you to change the disabled properties, which is the output we define here. So the limit price and the stop price are the identity of these fields here. I want you to change the disabled property. So the disabled property we're going to change to true on both if it's market, false on both if it's a bracket, and false for the limit price and true for the stop price if it's a limit order. So with these, you're going to have your differences in what you want these disabled properties to be, and then you want to change the toast text depending on what this was. So here I don't really care to open a toast, right? Because I'm going to see it automatically if something happens when I change this. I don't need a toast to tell me these just changed. So here I'm not going to open the toast. So if the type field is changed and one of these are selected, then pass back these properties. So in our return, we're updating 4 things: those 2 properties and the toast text and toast open. So here all of these get assigned new values. If, however, I choose submit for submit order, I am going to do different things. I'm going to use the current LP and SP values. So I pull these in with states. So here you've got 2 states that'll tell me what the current values are. So if they're already disabled or they're already enabled, that LP and SP disabled come across here, and that's why I can change the value here, right? So LP and SP are already defined, but I change the value of what those are in this. Here I don't need to change the value. I want them to be what they were by default. So I pull in that state, and that's why I'm able to pass these back all the time. So you're already passing those back. And then here in my toast text and toast open, I will define those based upon what the next level is in our if statement. So here, if I submit order, I'm actually going to be able to select a security. So if I say this goes to an enter and I want to trade Apple and I want to get 10 shares of my Apple, I can come in here and I want to select market order type and I want 10 shares of Apple. When I click submit order, you will now see a new toast that says market order submitted. You'll be able to go to your brokerage and you'll see that I did place a limit market order, for 10 shares at whatever the current price is whenever the market opens back on the next trading day. And that allowed me again to select these drop down, select which one that was, and submit a market order. So what happened here in our callback? So submit order is what changed it. I had a row selected, so this row's none is actually coming from these values, where I am looking in and pulling the state of the selected row and pulling all of the data from that comparison table. So I'm pulling in what row I've got selected and the data. I say in this is if the row, so I'm defining the row as the selected row, if it's not empty, basically if I have a row selected and submit order was pushed, then come into here. I'm now going to define the symbol as the data. I'm going to look through the data and I'm going to tell it, based on your selected row, tell me what symbol is selected. So this is actually grabbing, this line of code is grabbing the symbol value from this selected row. Then I'm going to look at S-type, which is defined here, the third to last value, as the state value of this. So it's a market type. So here I'm now in this. If it's market, if S-type is equal to market, then submit an alpaca market order. So go to my alpaca functions and submit a market order, and you submit that by calling this function and giving it a symbol, a quantity, and a side. So we are giving it apple, quantity of 10, and buy as the side. We are also defining our toast text, which you saw when we clicked that submit button, and our toast open property, which allowed the toast to open and display this message. And then of course it auto dismissed after 4 seconds because that's how we have it defined. If I had selected a limit order, this would in fact give me a limit option, and if I want instead now GM and I want a limit price of 45, for example, and I click submit order, limit order has now been submitted, and you can see we were in limit order submitted, and I have, looking back to my brokerage, submitted a limit buy for GM at $45 per share for 10 shares. And you can also see our alpacas table is updating, and I'll show you this callback next, but we are updating this. So you've got these two orders which are now open and ready. And then the same thing would happen with the bracket order. So I think you understand at this point, right? But if I were to submit a bracket order, I would call my alpaca bracket order. And again, we're able to do this because we've defined up here that we imported our alpaca functions notebook, and we're able to call all functions. And with that, we would submit, if we chose bracket, we would submit an alpaca bracket order with the symbol, quantity, stop price, and limit price as defined here in our fields. And you would have a very similar line item come in here when I hit submit. But again, I think you get the picture. So if those are selected, update my trade, update my toast text and my toast open. So we're going to update those items, and we're gonna pass these outputs when these happen, and depending on the input, we're going to change those outputs to what we need them to be. So again, this is how we're using that submit button to enter trades, and how we're using that drop down to define the properties of these values, so that we can define our limit price and stop price if it's a bracket type, or not define either if it's a market type. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is how we're updating the tables, and what we're doing here, how to close positions and cancel orders. So this next callback, located below for callback for alpaca tables, is going to update our portfolio table, our orders table, and then our alpaca toast. So these four properties are going to be updated if I press the submit order button, the cancel order button, the close position button, or if my interval 2 component, which I believe is every 60 seconds, if memory serves me correct, yes, every 60 seconds. If these four things happen, this callback will fire. So this callback, we are going to, very similarly to what you're used to, look for the property that entered the callback. If it's cancel order, we are going to look in the O data and look for the selected row and get the ID. So very similarly to what we did when we placed the trade, here we're going to look for the selected order. So in this one, I'm going to select Apple, and I want the ID when I click this button, and I want it to cancel this open order. So let's go ahead and click it, show you what that looks like. So you can see it's already pending cancel. On here, you can see, it'll probably take a second to update. Yep, there we go. So it updated, and it is in fact canceled. So this market order, when we click that button, is canceled, and we did that by pulling in. So if it was the cancel order button that was selected, so that was our input that fired it. We looked for rows 2, which is defined as looking in the selected row in our alpaca orders table, and then we went to our alpaca orders data and grabbed the ID for that selected row. So this call right here, we are looking in the O data, our orders data, and we are looking for the selected row, and we're grabbing the ID for that selected row. We are then passing and calling the cancel order function. So cancel order is an alpaca function that we created to be able to pass the ID to alpaca and call our API to cancel that open order. So we simply looked for that information out of the table and utilized cancel order function to cancel it. From there, we update our orders table and our portfolio table by calling get alpacas tables from our functions again. So we're calling our get alpaca table and getting our portfolio and orders table. We are updating those to the correct format to be able to update our tables, which as defined here. So we need to output the correct data to update those. And then we're going to update our toast text and our toast open. So those are going to be the returns. We're outputting our portfolio table, orders table, toast open, and toast text. The other button that can fire this is our close position. So in our close position, it's going to do the same thing. If I want to close my GM shares or my Apple shares, so if I want to collect this $30.03 in unrealized profits, I have the ability to select GM and select close selected position. You can see instantly when I selected that I am submitting a market sell order for those 10 shares that I own. And you can see here that actually that has already, nope, there we go, sorry, it has now come across. So we are now have an open order to alpaca to sell those 10 shares at a market price on open. So when I click that, same thing happened. I looked through the position data, so I imported the position data using the state, the selected row of that table. So I'm grabbing the row and the position data, and I'm looking for the asset ID of this item. So this is the asset ID. I'm looking for that asset ID, and then I'm calling my close position function here from my alpaca notebook and telling it to close that position. I then update the orders table and the portfolio table. I put these in the correct format, and then I update my toast, and I pass that information as the return. Lastly, if the interval component 2 is what triggered this input, all I'm doing is refreshing the information so that I can see the most up-to-date items. I may have done something in alpaca myself. So if I closed and canceled this, so I cancel that, I want my table to know that somebody did that, or that I did that, or something occurred. So I will have it update every 60 seconds and refresh and grab the information for these tables. So that's what's happening here. I'm just simply updating those tables, putting them in the right format, and then passing that information back. So with this callback and the first callback, we are essentially doing all the things we need to do to be able to interact with our broker. So we're giving us the ability to automatically select a property when we get a buy symbol and enter a market, a limit, or bracket order. We're able to update our configurable inputs here to tell it what we want to grab or what we want to trade, what the limit and stop price needs to be. We're able to refresh our tables and see what our current positions and orders are, and we're able to selectively close our orders and our positions based upon our selected rows here. So there was a lot of stuff we've added in this section, but before we close, I would recommend that you really get familiar with these callbacks. So I can't stress enough, and I've said it, and I sound probably like a broken record, but these are going to be very important to understand what is telling these things to fire, what is telling them to fire, how you're getting the right inputs, the types, what you're updating, and being very selective with these callbacks, and how, and are you going to use multiple, or are you going to try to put it all into one, and try to reduce complexity or add complexity depending on what your unique programming style is. So trace through these before we jump into the next section, and really make sure you understand what is happening to update that dashboard. So in the last section we covered adding those components. In this section I want you to understand how those are updating, how we're interacting with that broker manually and automatically. So really trace through these things, figure out what we're calling, how we're calling it, how we're updating that information, putting it in the correct formats with its output, and then keeping that up-to-date info in front of you here for your brokerage link. And before we jump into the last piece, I would also recommend, if you want to try this with Robinhood, or you want to try it with TD Ameritrade, now's a good chance to do that. You don't have to wait till the end. You can try to change those tables. Instead of being alpaca orders and positions, make it the others. Make sure it's the right format. And if you have questions, again, reach out to me. I put my email on here so that I can try to help in those scenarios. But with that, again, I'll try to close this section, and we'll go ahead and close out this piece with looking at auto trade execution. So this little button up here for enable auto trader, we've added a callback in here specifically to help you scan through these tables when you may not be paying attention, and potentially enter orders for you. So we will cover that in a quick section before we close out.